Okay, this is an excerpt from Straight A at Stanford on to Harvard. This is the better version for most students. It's a small little student version of the book. This is sort of the big honkin' big version of the book. I say for grade school, high school, college kids, this is a better one. Maybe for med school students too. Only for a really serious student would this be the best one. Okay, so anyways, I call it chapter 2 or chapter 3 depending on which version. There are several editions and versions of the book. Okay, so anyways, here's the title of the chapter. Pre-reading. Pre-reading is one of the major skills. I don't know if you can hear the church bells. Isn't that nice? Okay, pre-reading is one of the major skills to make you a better student. And again, I come from the background of Stanford where everybody's like 99.5 or better percent SATs in the class. So if you want to be a top-notch student in that environment, you got to be a really good student. Okay, this picture just shows an example of illustrated condensed notes. Actually, I had these notes. I made these when I was studying for my neuroradiology boards, and I would take pictures into a book, and I would make tab indices with little stickers, and the point being I could find everything very quickly. So in the last couple of weeks before the exam, all the information was immediately available to me, and I would like to do that because, I mean, that's one step to being a good student is saying to yourself, well, this exam, this midterm, for example, it's only a stepping stone to finals. It's only a stepping stone to the board's exam, a year from now, a year and a half from now. And so what I'm saying is in my mind's eye, I wasn't just trying to get a good grade on the test. I was trying to really learn the material. And I was trying to keep the material in my mind. And in a sense, I wasn't running a sprint. I was running a marathon, and I was preparing for a long-time career, becoming a great doctor. So what that means is that you're constantly absorbing the material, and you just get better and better and better. And I felt that other students were, let's say, going on this trajectory. I was going on this trajectory. And eventually I just got so far ahead of them that they weren't even in my ballpark. And that's what happens when you try to really learn the material over time. So let's say I had a question book. I would go through the question book when I'm preparing for midterms. I'd go through the question book when I'm preparing for finals. I would go through the question book the second year when I was studying the topic from another context, like the diseases of an organ system versus the anatomy of an organ system versus the physiology of an organ system. And then I would go through the question book again by the time I studied for board. So the point being is I had gone through that question book 4 or 5 times. So by the time it was time to take boards, I knew the thing backward and forwards. Okay, so anyways, this is an illustrated condensed notes, and that's in comparison to a standard condensed notes. All right, now back to the topic of the paper, pre-reading. So the challenge I was faced with, as all students are when they take biology classes, they go to grad school, med school, is how do you learn such a tremendous amount of material? They give you just tons and tons of stuff to memorize. Okay, and this technique of pre-reading, it is a game changer. It changed my life academically. So before pre-reading, I'd get kind of overwhelmed at a biochemistry lecture, and then I would have to study all that material by myself on a weekend. It was a lot of work to do. Sort of like, I'm sitting there like a good boy in the front row, trying to keep up with the teacher. The pace goes faster and faster, and then they start to overwhelm you with all these new terms. And you're like Hansel and Gretel. You put out your breadcrumbs, but they're gone. You're lost, okay? So I said, another weekend I'm going to have to study this stuff. I'm mad at the teacher for going so fast, at myself for being so clueless. Another weekend of chasing biochemistry instead of girls. So I called up Chuck Kinder. He's a Harvard-trained cardiologist in Chicago. I knew that he had graduated first in his medical school class. And I asked him, Chuck, it's like drinking from a fire hose. I can't keep up. What should I do? He said, Pete, get the co-op notes from last year. Me, what's a co-op? The students get together and they make typed copies of the lecture notes for each individual class, and then they pass them out every week or two. And then what you can do is just buy last year's version because the notes are usually pretty much the same. Make sure you have the teacher's syllabus of what the topic is. And you read those last year's notes in advance before your lecture, and you'll be prepared for the material. So and what I would do is I would often have 4 different books, let's say for biochemistry. And I'd have all 4 biochemistry books out on my table. And I would go through each of them and try to get the gist of what I was looking at. Like, let's say tomorrow's lecture is going to be on glycolysis. I would ask myself this question: what is the irreducible minimum from which all of glycolysis can be derived? And if you spend a while looking at it, it's obviously the location of the phosphate. So once you know the location of the phosphate, you make a mnemonic for the location of the phosphate, and then you can memorize the cycle pretty easily. Once you know the intermediates in the cycle, then it's pretty easy to memorize the enzyme names, and it's pretty easy to memorize, whether or not an ATP is made, what the cofactors are. Okay, so anyways, Like Chuck Kinder told me, he said, everybody is smarter the second time around they've seen the material. So by the time you go to class, make sure you've seen that material before. And once you spend time reading about the topic the night before, now you've got all the vocabulary, you can pronounce the material, you can spell the material, and because you know it, it's easy to make abbreviations, so you can keep up with the teacher better. And I kind of had an attitude, you got to get yourself psyched up. I'm like, this professor, he's an old PhD, ready to put out for pastor. I'm the young guy, I'm the up and coming, I'm the future, he's the past. I was trying to get myself psyched up, and I'd make it a game. I'd always sit right in the front row, and I'd make it a game. How can I suck up all the information and not have the professor get anything by me? And I got to the point where I would get 85, 90% of all the material, know it and understand it like it was a review, right in that biochemistry lecture. And the biochemistry lecture, it's like an emotional event. You want to go to class. You want to sit in the front row. So there's no distractions, no cell phones, no computers, nothing. You're just sitting there. I like to write by hand because I can improvise my notes. I know some people like to write in a computer. You can if you want, but I liked writing in my notes by hand. And so after I did that, I just crushed biochemistry after that. I was first in my class in the subject. My ability to comprehend a biochemistry lecture went from about 30% to 95%. I went on to score 780 out of a possible 800 on the medical school national boards exam in biochemistry. And I know that the 99th percentile began somewhere around 690 because that was like my worst score on anything, and I got 99s on everything. So it's either that or even lower. And so, that's one of the highest, if not the highest score in the whole USA. I don't know exactly how they graded it. So pre-reading, it familiarizes you with the concepts and the terms for the lecture, the abbreviations, so you can keep up with the teacher, so you can understand it. So it converts the lecture, instead of just being new material, into largely being a review. And you'll always hear the teacher's voice in your head. You can fill in the gaps later with your notes, most of them. Okay, class lecture is the highest yield for information in grad school and in most colleges too. So you want that material to know it pretty well. The lecture is an emotional event. You want to be there physically. It's much better, I felt, to be there than to just watch it online. You might do both, but also nowadays you've got online lectures for these topics. So I would watch the lectures the night before. And again, try to understand them as best as possible. I would leave some space in the margin to add stuff in later. I would try to look at my notes as soon as possible. That way I could still hear the teacher's voice in my head to fill in any gaps in the note. Try to find time as soon as possible to review that material. In the car, when I was, let's say, if I had to drive around that time, I would not play any music. I would just talk to myself in the car. Okay, let's go back through the cycle of glycolysis. Glucose comes into the cell. It's phosphorylated to put a charge on it, trap it in the cell so it can't exit back out the membrane. Then you got to make it symmetric. Okay, so then I go, here's how it isomerizes. Okay, for most students, better to handwrite. Some like the computer. Okay. I would use like the 4-color pen. We used to call that the pre-med pen. So I could, color code different things to make them easier to remember. Note-taking speed is what you need. Pre-read front row is the way to go. So that's a very powerful study skill technique. It's a difference between crushing the class and making it into a review versus being overwhelmed. So I hope that was helpful to you.